Hi everyone, I'm Serena and I'm back to introduce you to the Jane Goodall Institute UK. The Jane Goodall Institute is an incredible organization that promotes understanding and protection of great apes. We had the fantastic opportunity to talking with Jane Goodall herself about their conservation work and the project that will benefit from our crowdfunding campaign on Indiegogo.
So, Dr. Jane Goodall, it's now almost 60 years since you began your pioneering work with chimpanzees. Looking back, what do you consider to be your most important achievements?
When it comes to studying chimpanzees and that part of what I've done, I think the tool using and tool making was highly significant simply because at that time, scientists believed that humans and only humans used and made tools. And because I saw chimpanzees using grass stems to fish termites and then leafy twigs, so they had to modify them, remove the leaves or the side twigs to make them useful as tools. You know, that was one of the things, along with all these similarities between us and chimps, that forced science back in the 60s to change the way they were thinking about our relationship with animals. Because back then, I was told that there was a difference between us and all the other animals, a difference of kind, and of course its degree. And so I think that was very, very significant to be able to help people understand we are not the only sentient beings on the planet, the only beings with personalities, minds, and emotions.
And of course, your approach was the opposite to that of scientists. You gave the animals names, you lived among them, viewed them as humans in some respect. A lot of people didn't really take you seriously, did they, at the time? They found your findings difficult to accept.
Yeah, they didn't want to accept them because why should they believe this young girl? I hadn't been to college even. And, I was new out from England. Nobody else had been out in the wild studying chimpanzees. I think they thought it was a little bit crazy. They thought Louis Leakey, who gave me the opportunity, was totally crazy and irresponsible. And so the tool using, they said, well, why should we believe her? But then the tool using brought in the National Geographic Society. And they said they would continue funding the research when I only had 6 months when that ended, money ended. And secondly, they sent out a filmmaker, Hugo van Lawick. And so with his film and my detailed description, science then had to believe that what I said was true.
Not many small girls in the 1930s and 1940s dreamt of going to Africa. But I understand your mother was extremely encouraging and said you could achieve whatever you wanted to if you put your mind to it.
Yeah, she was the most wonderful mother, and she's always looking over my shoulder. So I was born loving animals, and she was very supportive. So she didn't even get mad when I took earthworms to bed. I was only 1.5. And obviously there was a whole lot of earth in the bed too. But she told me later, she said, Jane, you were looking at them as though you were wondering, how do they move without legs? Anyway, she took them back into the garden with me. And then she supported my love of animals by getting books for me. When I was growing up, it was in World War II, no television. So you learn from books. And she got books from the library. We had so little money, we couldn't afford new books, and books about animals. And then when Leakey offered me this amazing opportunity to go and live, not with any animal as I was prepared to do, as long as it was wild, but chimpanzees, the individuals most like us. But the British authorities, because it was still Tanganyika back then, part of the crumbling British Empire, and the authorities said they would not have a young girl on her own. They wouldn't take responsibility. So it was Mum who volunteered to come with me. So that's the kind of amazing mother she was.
Now, as a child, you read the story of Dr. Dolittle, about a doctor who can talk to animals and who travels to Africa. And you also loved the Tarzan books. Is it right you thought you would have been a better partner for Tarzan because Jane was a little silly?
Absolutely. I thought she was a wimp, and Tarzan made a big mistake. He chose the wrong Jane.
So What advice would you give to a young person today who wants to have a career in animal conservation?
First of all, I would say they need to be really absolutely sure that this is what they want to do, because it's not easy. There's competition for money. And the best thing, if it's possible, is to take a gap year and volunteer, for example, in one of the sanctuaries looking after orphaned animals, or a program where they can actually go out into the field and make sure that that's really what they want to do. And then if that's what they really want to do, then if they do what my mother told me, if you really want this thing, you're going to have to work really hard, take advantage of every opportunity. And then if you don't give up, I'm sure you'll find a way.
Now, we know that chimpanzees are our closest cousins now, which we didn't before, and they share about 98, 99% of our genes. Looking back, though, when did you first recognize this close connection, and in what way was it evident?
Well, before I ever went to Gombe, I read everything I could find about chimpanzees. There was nothing in the wild. Nobody had even attempted that, except one man for 2 months who went around with a retinue of porters. I think he saw chimpanzees once in 2 months. But apart from that, nobody had been out in the field. But there was a book, it's now been reprinted, called The Mentality of Apes by an Austrian psychologist. And he was studying a captive colony, oddly enough, in Tenerife in the Canary Islands. And he describes those chimpanzees. And it's brilliant. And he's a psychologist, he's a scientist. But the scientists were all saying, well, those were captive chimps. So obviously human intelligence has rubbed off on these captive chimps. That's how arrogant science tends to be. But when I got into the field, I mean, kissing, embracing, holding hands, patting one another, same context we do it in. The males competing for dominance, swaggering, bristling, furious face, shaking their fists upright, reminding me of a number of human politicians, name no names. And the long-term family bonds I gradually got to understand between mothers and their offspring. They have a dark side, like we do. They're capable of violence, even a kind of war, but also love, compassion, and true altruism, when one individual will help another, even though that individual is not genetically related, as far as we know.
Well, now, the TV drama series Narikos Voyage, produced by Max Robinson, has an animated chimpanzee called Aristotle as a co-star. And as you know, the idea is to raise money for your institute, the Jane Goodall Institute in the UK. How do you feel about this news? And is there a particular project you'd like to support with this money?
Well, first of all, I feel immensely grateful, because we're always needing money for our various projects in Africa, our project with young people in the UK, and our sanctuaries. So to have a company that's dedicating profit to us is fantastic news. It's also showing a confidence in us, which wouldn't be there if we weren't doing a good job. So I think it sort of boosts your morale a bit. And as for the project, we support a chimpanzee sanctuary for orphaned and confiscated chimpanzees in South Africa, not a range country, but these chimpanzees are confiscated from people who think they make good pets, or confiscated from the illegal wildlife trade. And as I've said, money is always a problem. And it's not cheap to run a sanctuary. And it's been very, very tough for all of these chimpanzee sanctuaries during this pandemic, because chimpanzees are very susceptible to respiratory diseases. And so every effort had to be taken to keep them safe. And that meant a lot of extra unbudgeted for money.
Of course, your work is now about a lot more than animal sanctuaries, chimpanzee sanctuaries. It includes other projects such as restoring habitats, fighting climate change, and agroforestry. But they're all interrelated in a way, aren't they?
Oh, absolutely. And I learned that in the rainforest when I was in Gombe, the happiest days of my whole life, no question. you know, before I began this activist career, this second career. And these hours I spent alone in the rainforest, I learned about the interconnectedness of life and how every little species has a role to play, no matter how small it may seem. And I also got this feeling of a spiritual connection with some great power, which you might call God, you might call creator, you might call I don't know what, but something. And so the interconnection of everything in this life, you know, some people say, well, I'm just interested in animal welfare. But I learned, the reason I began this activism was learning that right across Africa, chimp numbers were dropping and forests were being destroyed. And I just felt I needed to learn more about what was going on so that I could try and do something about it, although I had no idea what I could do. Managed to get to 6 range states on a budget on a shoestring. But not only was I learning about the problems faced by chimps, but also by many of the people living in and around chimpanzee habitat, you know, the crippling poverty, the lack of health and education facilities, the degradation of the land as human populations and their livestock grew. And when I flew over the tiny Gombe National Park, where our research is still going on 60 years later, it came to a head, this concern, because Gombe had been part of a equatorial forest belt that stretched right across from Western East Africa to the West African coast. When I flew over in 1990 in a small plane, sure, I knew there was deforestation. I was not expecting to see this tiny island of forest surrounded by completely bare hills. More people living there than the land could support. When you're very poor, you cut down the last trees in your desperate effort to grow food to feed your family as the existing farmland becomes infertile. And these people were struggling to survive. And that's when it hit me. If we don't find ways for these people to make a livelihood without destroying the environment, we can't try to save chimpanzees, forests, or anything else. And so that's when the Jane Goodall Institute began our program that's now so successful, TACARE, or TACARE, it's known as. It's JGI's method of community-based conservation. And it began in 1994 when this kind of idea was pretty new. And I think we did it in a new way. We didn't have a bunch of arrogant white people going into a poor African village and telling them they'd messed things up and this is what they had to do. No, it was a local group of 7 local people. Very, you know, they were just local friends. They went into the villages around Gombe, 12 of them, and asked the people, what can we do, JGI, to help you? And that's where we began. And gradually, the villagers came to trust us because other NGOs come in and go out. We stayed. And gradually, we were able to get more money. It started with a tiny grant from the European Union. And the biggest problem was the EU said that we had to ask for more money. They didn't give out such small grants. And we said, but nobody's done this before. We don't know if it's going to work. And finally, they gave us what we needed, but 3 years, one after the other, so it mounted up a little bit. And so, you know, that program has been so successful. It's now in 104 villages throughout almost all chimp range in Tanzania. And it's involving things like scholarships to keep girls in school during and after puberty, because as women's education improves, family size tends to drop. Empowering women through Muhammad Yunus's Grameen Bank, or model of that program, so that they could take out tiny loans for environmentally sustainable small businesses, and they nearly all pay back. And so we're empowering women, educating women, providing family planning, which is so well received, because these people want to educate their children. Education is not cheap. even though it's sort of government sponsored, it still isn't cheap. You've got to buy uniform, bus fares, so on. So they can't afford to educate the number of children that each family used to have. So they love family planning. And now this whole program has created people who, instead of resenting, arrogant white people who've been our colonial masters for so long, they're our partners in conservation. And we've given them tools to conserve their own forest reserves. And they've learned to use smartphones and GIS, GPS, send this information up to a platform in the clouds. They're proud. And this is terribly important because nearly all Tanzania's chimps are not in protected areas. They're in these village forest reserves. So it's, we've created these partners in conservation and in 6 other African countries.
But despite your best efforts, the human race appears to be pushing the world population of chimpanzees towards extinction. But do you remain optimistic you can stop this happening? Or we as a world can stop this happening?
Well, we're not going to save all the chimpanzees, obviously. But in these African countries that I haven't mentioned their names, but Tanzania, Uganda, DRC, Burundi, Republic of Congo, Senegal, and Mali. That's where our programs are. And in all those places where we work, the chimpanzee populations are safe because we've involved the local communities who, they understand, well, maybe we can get money from tourism. And well-run ecotourism is really something very, very important because in poor nations, things need to have a value on them. And ecotourism brings foreign exchange in, which pleases central government. It gives jobs to local people as guides or in the hospitality business. And, so now it's worth saving the environment because it's helping them to live.
Well, now you've been awarded one of the United Nations' highest honors. You're a UN Messenger of Peace for your Roots and Shoot program. What's the objective of that program?
Well, back in 1991, when I had begun traveling around the world trying to raise money and awareness, I kept meeting young people, not only young, but, university, high school, who seemed not to have hope. Mostly they were just apathetic. They didn't seem to care. But some of them were really depressed. Some of them were angry, even violent. And when I asked them, why do you feel this way? Well, because you've compromised our future and there's nothing we can do about it. Well, we have compromised their future, haven't we? We've stolen it. We're still stealing it now. But is it too late? Is it true there's nothing they could do? No, I didn't think so. And so Roots and Shoots began with 12 high school students in Tanzania who were concerned about all kinds of things. Why wasn't the government prosecuting poachers in the national parks? Why wasn't the government prosecuting illegal dynamite fishing, which was destroying the coral reefs? Why was nobody doing anything about street children with no homes? Why were people allowed to be cruel to animals in the market or stray dogs? All kinds of things. And so I told them to find their friends who had similar worries. And we had a meeting. And from that meeting, this Roots and Shoots was born. And its main message was every single individual makes an impact on the planet every single day. And we get a choice as to what kind of impact we make. And then because of this interrelation between living organisms and situations, we decided every group would choose 3 projects to make the world a better place. 1 for people, 1 for animals, 1 for the environment, or a big project involving all those 3, which is quite easy actually. And so from that little group of 12, we began spreading through Tanzania. And we're now in approximately 68 countries, but it's always growing. And we keep finding little groups in some remote jungle area that nobody ever heard about. But, you know, a child will go from one school to another, take the roots and shoots with them because they love getting involved, because they choose their projects. And, you know, when you start taking action and you're feeling depressed, but you and your group get together and you, for example, maybe you clean up a stream and you see clean water now going into the river. And then you know there's other people just like me feeling like this, and they're cleaning streams all over the world now. And that's cleaning up rivers. And maybe we can help to stop this terrible plastic pollution going into the ocean. And so once they get engaged and involved, then hope comes back. We can do it. And so that's why this program, I think, is growing so fast. It's partly because the young people get involved in something they are passionate about, not top down where they're told to do something. Although we do have global campaigns, which every group is encouraged to take part in, like planting trees right now to match the trillion tree challenge that was announced at Davos this year.
There are two things that everyone could do to help preserve endangered wildlife. What would they be?
Well, one is a very simple one, and that is stop eating meat, or at least eat much less, and try to stop consuming dairy. So how does this help endangered wildlife? Well, it helps because there are now billions, literally billions, of domestic animals, cows, pigs, poultry, in these intensive factory farms. And not only is it horribly cruel, it's also unhygienic. Many of these so-called zoonotic diseases that we're suffering from right now with this pandemic, they have actually started from these nasty conditions in the factory farms, which enable a pathogen to jump from an animal to a person when it may start a new disease. And also, the animals have to be fed. Huge areas of habitat are cleared to grow the grain. Lots of fossil fuel with all its carbon dioxide emissions leading to climate change is used to get the grain to the animals to the abattoir, which sometimes means long journeys, and finally the meat to the table. And then in addition, all of these animals are producing methane gas in their digestion. We all do, but these are billions and billions of animals. And that's one of the very virulent greenhouse gases, along with carbon dioxide, you know, which circle the globe and like a sort of blanket, trapping the heat of the sun. So moving towards a plant-based diet, and veganism is growing and growing and growing all around the world, is definitely something. And then you asked for two. Well, the other one I would say is, don't always think that saving endangered animals means Africa or Latin America or Borneo, but around your neighborhood, are there areas of woodland or marshland or wetland which are threatened by yet another shopping mall or yet another road driving through it? And see if you can get involved with peaceful but very determined protests that this doesn't need to be. We don't need another shopping mall. We've got too many already. It's feeding this materialistic way of living that is destroying the planet.
Now, you've inspired many people over several decades, but how would you like to be remembered by future generations?
I think, for one thing, helping people to understand the true nature of animals. You know, we now know that it's not only apes and elephants and dolphins and whales who are highly intelligent, but it goes right down to this amazing intelligence of the octopus. This new film that's sweeping the world, My Octopus Teacher, by Craig Foster. It's amazing. I don't know if you've seen it.
No.
Oh, try and see it. It's incredible. But, you know, even before this film, there's all these stories about how octopus out in the ocean floor will carry 2 half coconut shells to where they want to hunt, where there are no rocks to protect them. And they put 1 half down, they ooze their soft bodies into it, and they reach out with a couple of arms and put the lid over their head. 2 little eyes peep out, and fish passes by from it's so, you know, they're amazing. So that's, and I do believe that thanks to working with chimps, I was able to start that whole movement for people recognizing that. Starting roots and shoots, that definitely, because that'll go on no matter what. And also this TACARE program, which, as I say, is spreading. We're all ready to scale it up, making use of the most up-to-date technology, GIS, GPS, satellite imagery, putting it in the hands of people. And of course, young people love this because that's what they love. So that's encouraging them out into nature, which is part of roots and shoots. So even these things are all interconnected.
You sound hopeful for the future.
As we come out of this pandemic, we need to get together to somehow create a different relationship with the natural world, because right now we're using up more of nature's finite resources more quickly than Mother Nature can replenish them. And we need a new relationship with animals so that we stop creating situations like the wildlife markets of Asia, the bushmeat markets of Africa, the growing trade illegally, mostly illegal, in wild animals as pets, all of which give rise to conditions that can lead to another pandemic. And we somehow need to get together to do something which I know has to be done, but I'm not an economist, but a new, greener, more sustainable economy and a more just way of living, so that we don't have this huge gap between the haves and the have-nots, which is getting wider, and we end discrimination. And that's what Roots and Shoots also is all about. So again, these things are interconnected.
Dr. Jane Goodall, it's been an absolute pleasure talking to you. Thank you very much.
Well, great talking to you as well. Thank you so much.